Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. If others come in, Gavin, if you could just help admit some of them, that would be good.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Hi.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So there'll be a couple more people that are coming in, but we will let them in as they go. I'm conscious we don't want to go over time. See, it's Tuesday evening, so we know it's a work day, school day tomorrow. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. So we obviously here during England Hopes Week. So England Hopes Week is basically a week of education. We are very much celebrating the pathway, educating. You'll probably see across the week, if you're following our social medias, there's several things being launched, different articles, a couple of exciting things coming towards the end of the week. And then obviously we have the England Hopes Cup on the weekends with the winners getting the wildcard for ITF World Hopes Week. So yeah, really excited to be delivering this tonight. So be myself. So my name's Emma. For those that don't know me, my role is head of pathway development. I oversee the talent programs that we have here at Tennis England, and then we've also got Gavin Evans with me, who's going to be helping me deliver this call and supporting different aspects. And Gavin leads our performance team, so yeah, very much going to be sharing his insights into the journey of a talented table tennis player and what it takes to get to the top. So if you can keep your mics on mute, that would be very much appreciated, just so we don't get any background noise. Any questions you have as we go along, can you put them in the chat? Gavin will kind of monitor the chat as I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen. And yeah, any questions, we will very much be happy to answer those either as we go along or at the end of the session. So yeah, as I said, England Hopes Week, we plan to run this week every year. So it might change next year. It might be more based around activity in Sheffield, but yeah, we will assess that and see how this week has gone. So what we're going to be looking at today is essentially the journey of a young talented tennis player, what it takes from initiating table tennis all the way to progressing to that senior level. So specifically, we're going to be looking at under 12, 12 to 15, and 15 to 19. And predominantly, we're going to be looking more at some of those lifestyle transitions and decisions that players will be faced with, may have to make. And myself and Gavin are going to be talking about some of the realities, decisions that players might be faced with, and we're going to be talking through some different case studies of players that we have in our system at the moment, and yeah, some of the different routes they've taken and challenges, barriers and successes they've had along the way. So yeah, please do obviously ask questions on the chat, and we very much try and answer as many as we can. Okay, so we've called this session The Long and Winding Road. So not just a Beatles classic, but we've decided to help it depict the journey of players as they progress through the pathway. So as a player progresses from being a talented player, showing prospects, making their mark on the senior international scene, there are lots of decisions, challenges, and things that they're going to face along the way. So as I said, we'll predominantly look at this from a lifestyle perspective. And, these decisions aren't just going to be within table tennis. So obviously things will come up. There'll be new environments, people, age categories. But also, if we look holistically, there are things around the player's education, very important decisions to make when it comes to that aspect. And perhaps also things in the player's personal life as well. So just depicted Anna Hersey here, who you'll all be very familiar with. And obviously she was there competing at the Paris Games last year, but I put that, not too far within her journey because, yeah, although it might seem a bit of a triumph to obviously get there at such a young age, for Anna, it's obviously only a step on that journey, and there's very much more ahead. So, as I said, I'm going to look at things more holistically, and we're going to look at them from different age categories, so under 12, 12 to 15, and 15 to 19. But before we do that, just wanted to share an image that we have within our Tennis England Pathway Guide, and that sort of depicts that whole journey that players will go on. So what we've got on this image here are some of the different transitions that players may experience. So when we talk about transitions, so we're typically talking about a period of change within the person's life. And obviously with change comes new norms, new expectations, new people, new demands. Yeah, a whole load of new things for the person to take on board. So I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail, but what you'll see is that whole journey. You'll see in blue some of those different changes we can typically maybe expect or prepare for. So they give us time to really think about what that change is going to look like and make preparations. Then in red, sometimes there's things that happen along the way that typically maybe we can't prepare for, we can't predict. So deselection from a program, changes in performance structure, changes in funding, moving into periods of injury, obviously something that we typically can't expect and can be more challenging to overcome than those that we can. You've also got the odd one or two that are in green. So these are things that we might expect to happen, but actually end up not happening. So, for example, being selected for a major event obviously can be a big disappointment or perhaps even a relief for some athletes. So yeah, please do have a look at this in our pathway guide. So what we have in that document as well is sort of an overview of some of these different transitions, what they might look like. And we're going into a lot more detail, but yeah, I thought it was important before we narrow down to actually go broader and look at the whole journey to start with. Okay, so I want to focus more on these couple of slides that we have. And the first one, as I said, we're going to be looking at that under 12 stage. So within our play development framework, this classifies as the early development phase. And this really is kind of the phase when players will be faced with their very, very first decisions, some different changes perhaps within their table tennis and sometimes within their education as well. So really what we're going to do is look at some of those key decisions and challenges players may face as an under 12. And the first one we really wanted to talk about was that decision to really increase investment in table tennis. And so that might involve lessening involvement in other activities and really committing to progression. So we know that lots of young people do various different sports. And, at an early age, that's actually a really positive thing because it helps build some of those physical foundations that can actually really benefit players in the long term. And what we know is that most of our top players that we have in our senior squad at the moment all did various different sports when they were younger, and obviously has benefited them hugely in their careers. But as players start to progress to around 10, we'll see probably more of an investment, maybe even specialisation in table tennis. And typically for players on a really high trajectory who are part of England programmes or looking to progress even further, some of the best players maybe in Europe in that age category will be training upwards of 14 hours a week. So it might sound a lot to some players, it might not sound a lot to some who are doing that, but typically these are the hours that we would expect for a player to be able to build the technical foundations, physical foundations that are required at this stage. So yeah, a really, really important decision for players to make and involves a whole commitment from the family from that aspect as well. So as players do start to make those commitments, they might need to start reprioritising. So obviously we know there's a big competition programme that comes with playing table tennis, and obviously high training commitment as well. So that might often involve starting to miss social occasions, birthdays, other events with school, school trips. And yeah, unfortunately, that is it's part of the journey that players have to decide to do. So at this stage as well, if players start to become part of England programmes, I know some of the players on the call will be, some won't be. Typically, you will be now missing school in order to do that. So a lot of the camps we have are based in the week, and that's obviously so we can get more time with players. That obviously might mean missing school on a number of occasions. Obviously, we can support that with letters of support, but it also means being able to catch up, being able to liaise with teachers and other maybe classmates around catching up with some of that work. So what we see as well is a lot of our players at this sort of age who maybe coming up to 11, 12 might want to see some additional training time in the day. So some players, for example, use their hours during PE to actually be able to train if they're lucky enough to have someone in the environment that can help support that. But really, it's about using that time you have available in the day as much as possible, which we know in the traditional school day isn't easy at all. So some of the changes that players may face at this age category, so perhaps moving into a pathway development centre for the first time, which might mean a bit more travel, a bit more commitment, new coach, new people, new training schedule, possibly that first step on the national pathway. So players that are part of the England Hopes programme will have a schedule of camps across the year, and perhaps some one-to-one time as well with national coaches. And that can involve, weeks away from parents for the first time, sharing with other players, having to, sort everything out for yourself. And can be, we do find players on those first camps can struggle. It is certainly a learning curve for many. At this stage as well, we would very much expect players to already been exposed internationally to international table tennis. So what we say is by 11 at the latest. If a player is on a higher trajectory and been identified as talented in national programs, 11 really is the cutoff for that. We see our kind of European counterparts exposed to a lot of international competition at this stage, and sometimes difficult for us to keep up, obviously being in an island and having to navigate that aspect. And then finally, it might involve that transition out of primary school and into secondary school. So that can obviously lead to a number of other changes, perhaps a high distance in travel, longer hours, more homework, different people. So yeah, can be a big challenge during that phase as well. So one thing just to highlight that's in the red box on the right, so I've just tried to highlight some of the key messages. And one of those things that we actually discussed in the first session, pathway education session, was around how competition is often prioritised for players over training. And we actually don't think that's always the right thing to do. Sometimes training, particularly at this age group, it is more important than competition. So yeah, don't always feel like you have to compete 3-4 times a month. Training, getting in the hall, correcting things that have gone wrong, reflecting on the event is equally as important at this stage as it is at later stages as well. So one thing we really wanted to point out there. Gavin, is there anything else in this sort of age category that you would like to point out?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as we try to eliminate pressure on young people, there's pressure that they'll have on themselves, but there's pressure that they might feel or perceive is coming from England programs or pathway development centres or even parents and wider family members, particularly when we start to look at things like European under 13 championships, European minis. These often are goals of young people, and that comes with quite a lot of pressure. And I feel sometimes it's not recognized as it should be. It's quite a new thing to feel like you have expectation from, maybe coaches, program leads, family members, school, whatever it might be, your friends, your peers, it's a lot of pressure to have on an 11 or 12-year-old shoulders. So I think we, as adults who support young people, need to be really aware of that and support them holistically in that part of their development as well.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. It's a really important point. Okay, so any comments, questions on that? As I said, drop them in the chat and we will look to progress to those at the end of the call. So progressing on to 12 to 15. So within our new player development framework, this classifies as players who are in that emerging talent phase, which means essentially they've been identified as being talented and possibly progressing towards a sort of elite level of table tennis. So during this phase, players will be exposed to some more complex decisions that they will have to make, possibly ones that now involve more of a bigger family commitment, and will need to develop a series of skills in order to be able to manage some of those as well. So looking at this phase, what some of those key decisions and challenges players might face. So I think one of the biggest ones that we've had a lot of discussion around recently and maybe hasn't always been an option for players is actually to consider relocation. So what we often say is that, you know, getting a player in a club environment will only get you so far. And that's not because of the skill set of the coaches or anything like that, but there is a point when players need to be in a more a more sort of elite environment, day-to-day training with a high-level coach, training alongside other players who have the same goal, all working towards the same thing. So what we have set up recently is a partnership with Grantham College, and that will become our Great Britain Youth Academy, which will service players in the interim at around 12 to 18, but actually looking to maybe shorten that age category slightly as we we get into the program in the years to come. So there are going to be some comms around this in the coming days. So you'll see an article and also a video about this. And yeah, it's very much a project we're looking forward to, and really is a missing piece to our pathway that we haven't had before for players in this age category. So yeah, as I said, one of the key decisions players might have to consider, and we know this comes with very, very complex decisions from a family and educational perspective as well, but might be to actually relocate to an environment where they can train upwards of around 18 hours in the week, which is typically 18 to 20 hours a player from 12 to 15 we would be expecting them to be able to engage in, and that will obviously mean possibly train during school hours as well, which would be possible in this new environment. So another thing to consider, players will need to think about what they want to study moving forward. So obviously when they reach the age of 15, 16 and leaving that formal school environment, thinking about what's next. So obviously A-levels, BTEC, there are lots of different options now for young people to consider, and there are also lots of different formats in which players can actually do that. So they can split years, so they can do A-levels, BTECs over 3 years. You can do a year, you can then skip a year and come back. So there are often there's a lot more flexibility than maybe players first know that there is. And yeah, a lot of our players in our programs now do take that flexibility and ensure that they have more time to be able to train on the table, and also more time to be able to travel internationally as well. So at this stage as well, we do look to have for some players who are on a really high trajectory in our programs to train in Asia for 2 training blocks a year. So we've just had a cohort of players go to Asia these past couple of weeks, and there'll be some more players going out in December to China. And yeah, it's really important, and I know that from Gavin, we'll talk about his experience of that, but having spent many months training in Asia, it's an experience that all players need to experience who are on this level. And yeah, the hours, the schedule, the discipline, it really does transform players, and we feel is a really important element that our players need to experience. So typically,
Emma,
yeah, of course.
There's a question in the chat. So it's from Lana. How many central training centres are there across the country, and are they mostly located in the north?
Okay, do you want to take that one or?
Yeah, sure. So we have a central training location in Sheffield, which is our elite training centre. So that's for players who will be moving there full time from really 16, 17 onwards. And then what Emma was explaining there was the GB Youth Academy, which is in Grantham. So that's situated in the Midlands, and that will be launching very shortly. And then we have Anthony, who's now working as a national coach down in the London area with a number of really talented players. And we also have our pathway development centres in situated across the country as well. So we're trying to build that system, and we're trying to create as many hubs of excellence as possible. But right now, in terms of national elite training environments, you're looking at Sheffield and Grantham for a full-time programme.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. Yeah. So as I was saying, international event exposure, very important that now increases. So players will probably be on a periodized program, building towards their first possible major international event. So typically, first major event for many players is the European Youth Championships, which happens every July and happens in the cadet and junior age categories. So that's an event where there'll typically be around 2 weeks of prep camp time. So it's 2 weeks of hard training away from obviously away from family, friends, and yeah, can be a difficult time. And then the event itself typically lasts for about 10 days and is yeah, for those very young players. So if you're 12, 13, experience this event for the first time, it's a yeah, it can be a bit of a shock challenge to cope with. You know, the tiredness will creep in as the days go on. There's a number of events to engage in, and yeah, a lot of matches of a high level as well. So that's really yeah, a big event. That's exciting, but also yeah, a big one to aim for. So the last point I've got in that first category is around growth periods. So we talk about this in our player development framework from a physical perspective, but also we have to think about it from a kind of motivational perspective. So typically, particularly for boys, they will experience growth periods in this phase. Girls might be a little bit earlier. I think the age is around 10 to 14. And yeah, we see players often shoot up very quickly. Often their tables becomes very uncoordinated for a while. They might experience some losses that they wouldn't have expected to experience. They might have some pain, particularly in their knees and their hips, and that can often demotivate players quite dramatically. We see some players drop off in that period, rather than really trying to work through it, ensure they are, you know, physically robust enough to progress through that period. So when it comes to key transitions, I think a couple of them I've already mentioned, but I think the one that we haven't is those first major exams. So obviously players will have their GCSEs when they get to sort of 15, 16, and there might be a bit more management around how players actually negotiate that year. They might have to spend more time in school than maybe they were previously if they were missing a lot of time. They probably need to do a lot of work that's set by school teachers on camps and away at events. And we often work very closely with players' schools and their teachers to ensure that they've got time to do that on camps. And we're happy to, yeah, take that on board as staff. And yeah, it's obviously something that's really important for players to do. Typically as well, when players do their GCSEs, if they are selected for European Youth Championships, can be quite tricky because they are, you know, quite close in a timeline to each other, and the player might have not engaged in enough training or competition before the European Youth Championships because of their studies. So yeah, that year can be quite a tricky one to manage. But I think all of that can be preempted if the player sort of can plan ahead, make sure they've got revision schedules, everything prepared for any camps that they might be required to go on. Anything else to add on that phase, Gavin?
I'm just looking in the chat. Oh, it's just to say thank you. No, not from me, Emma. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so conscious time. So I will move on to my last slide that I'll be leading on. So looking at that 15 to 19 bracket, so a little bit of a bigger age bracket here. So in our framework, we look at this as breakthrough talent, which means the player has been identified on a programme, so they might be progressing towards UK sport funding, or starting to gain medals on a European stage, and really, yeah, making a mark possibly towards senior international table tennis as well. So what we see within this age bracket is the most life changes typically happening, typically the most challenging period for a lot of players as they progress into adults and have to manage and make decisions for themselves, often for the first time. So some of the decisions, challenges players may face within this age category. So considerations around exit from further education. So obviously when they finish their studies at 18, if they do decide to do A-levels or BTECs, thinking about those next steps around how the player is going to actually combine their education with table tennis. So is it that they move into professional table tennis? Obviously, if players do that, they need to have a really clear plan around their sort of training commitments, what environment they're in, are they competing in a league, and I suppose really looking at financial stability at that point as well. What are they bringing in to be able to actually live full time as a table tennis player, which, yeah, can be a really challenging period for many. But many will decide to go to university and study alongside competing. So we now have a really strong relationship with Sheffield Hallam University for some of our elite players who are moving to Sheffield. There's obviously several of the universities in the area as well. And as I said, with further education, HE, higher education, can also be flexed probably more easily, actually. So we often have players doing a undergraduate degree over 4 to 5 years. You can take years out within your degree as well if you're trying to peak for a particular major event. There's also options around the Open University, which is where you don't actually have to physically be anywhere. You can do it all online, which some players find is quite helpful to be able to do with their laptop when they're traveling. So yeah, there are a lot of options around that, and as always, we are there to support whatever questions players may have around that. So as I said, as players progress in this age band, they are becoming adults and have to take more responsibility to manage and prioritize their own time. So typically when players get to 17, 18, we start to see them leading more on some of the communications with their national coaches, having more of an understanding about their schedule, why it's set in the way it is, their periodized program, what key events they're working towards, rather than it being more dictated maybe by parents and coaches. So yeah, what we like players to do is by at least 18 to be leading on communication with us and really taking ownership of that. So next one is around competing abroad. So when players get to about 17 or 18 and they are of level in our national programs, some of them do decide to start competing in a league abroad. So we have a number of players playing in the likes of like Sweden, Belgium, France, Germany, and typically they'll go over either once a month or possibly even twice a month, and may also build relationships with that club and be able to spend time in that environment training as well. So yeah, really good opportunity to start exposing yourself to different types of players, and that more start to make that transition into senior table tennis and start to become familiar with the senior game as well. So just final points from me. So sometimes what we see in this band as well is obviously 15 to 19. So when you leave the cadet age group, I know some events have under 17, but typically that's a big age jump from under 15 to being being with 19-year-olds. And we can see some players struggle with that, maybe not performing as they would like to within that first year or so, and that can be quite demotivating. So yeah, really understanding the journey that you're on and recognizing that, you know, those first year or two might be challenging because you are playing with players who are much older, much more experienced as well. So what are some of those key transitions players may face? So obviously preparing for that move to senior level. So really thinking about how you might operate as a senior player. So the senior game is a completely different game to the junior level. I'll maybe ask Gavin if he'll expand on that slightly in a moment. But in terms of the pool of players, the level of players. It really is a challenging world to negotiate. I don't know, Gavin, if you want to add more on what that kind of transition looks like for our players.
Yeah, I can do. I've got some notes written down for later on, but generally speaking, as you transition into the senior game, the coach to player ratio becomes a lot smaller. So the detailed approach to training is on a greater level. The demands on you from overseas clubs, from the World Table Tennis Tour. So essentially, if you're a certain ranking in the world, you are almost where you are. You're mandated to play certain events for World Table Tennis. If you don't, you get a ranking penalty, you get a financial penalty. These are huge decisions that people have to take, players have to take when they're 17, 18, wanting to transition into the senior game. It can be for the first couple of years very, very expensive, and I can touch on that when I talk about Tom Jarvis's journey. But there is a period of investment into your own career that happens across the world, where you come out of junior funding, typically from Sport England, you go into chasing some funding from UK Sport. Okay, the national governing body tries to do as much as they can, but it does require a little bit of a leap of faith, and high levels of belief in your own ability to go and challenge the very best in the world. There is a silver lining, when you do well, when you achieve, when you win good matches, you finish high positions in competition, then there is financial reward now in table tennis, and quite significant financial reward. But it takes a bit of a leap from the age of about 18 to 21, 22 to really make that transition to a world-class senior.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin. And yeah, I'm sure you will touch on that when it comes to Tom as well. Before we move on to the next part where we look at some of those case studies, just wanted to check if there's any more questions in the chat that had come up. No.
Sorry,
Okay.
Emma. No, there isn't.
No, that's absolutely fine. Okay, no worries. Please, again, do add any if you have them specifically about these players as well. Sure, we'd be happy to answer those. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand the floor mainly to Gavin. So I'm going to ask him some questions about two players in particular who are part of our performance programs, and yeah, on slightly different trajectories, very different journeys, but yeah, are doing very well, and I think we can learn a lot from what they're achieving at the moment. So the first one is Anna Hersey, who obviously is part of our Great Britain program, and as we know, progressed to the Olympic Games last year. So a couple of questions for Gavin about Anna. So the first one really is, what are some of the key decisions that Anna has had to make so far in her career that have helped her to accelerate her progression in the sport?
I think the big decision that Anna's had to make throughout her life is how she manages her life and commitment to the sport. So I've been working with Anna since she was 15 and a half, 16, but there was a whole lot of work that went on before that, in Wales and in China and her family. And essentially it was high levels of commitment, huge commitment from all the family to make sure that Anna has what's needed. So there was long extended periods of work done in China at a very, very young age, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, for weeks at a time to get the repetition required. There was, at a very young age, when we didn't have the GB program, Anna moved to Portugal and lived in Portugal out there at their national centre from about the age of 14, and a lot of the time was there spent on her own. That, I can imagine, was very, very challenging for her. And then the other big transition was making the decision to fully centralise and be all in on the senior journey. So she had decisions to make around schooling, education, and what Anna decided to do in the context of the world she lives in was to take her studying online. And she started to study online, which enabled her to train 25 to 30 hours a week. I would say Anna is a relatively extreme case study because of the amount of work that she does. It's huge levels of commitment, huge levels of repetition, huge investment from her family and support around her. But it's not uncommon to see Anna training 3 times a day, and managing her schoolwork around that, doing A levels and GCSEs online. And one of the big decisions that had to be made, and I remember sitting down with her father and John Murphy, the head coach, was around the Olympic Games in Paris. So when she was about 15 and a half, maybe just coming up to 16, John Murphy felt that she had real capacity to qualify for the Olympic Games. And we had to make a real decision as to whether, one, she's mentally ready to play in an Olympic Games, two, if she can cope with the pressure, but three, if she can go on the journey that it's going to require. And that journey essentially was 25 international competitions in 18 months. That enabled her to get the ranking points that was required for her to qualify to the Olympic Games. But it also enabled her to make a very quick transition into the senior ranks. And she consequently went on and won the European Olympic qualification event, beating many players in the top 60, 70 in the world. So I would say the big thing for me when I look at all of the best players in the program is it's a whole family commitment, and the commitment is extraordinary. We're in a sport that requires huge levels of repetition. I am in the industry with a number of performance directors, and there are sports that will train 7, 8 hours a week, and that's enough. That's just simply not the case in table tennis. Even the perceived talented individuals in the world. So if we take Truls Murgaard, for example, in Sweden, many look at him and think he's really creative and he's a natural talent. He's had the same journey, 25, 30 hours a week training in Sweden, extreme levels of repetition. And then he's got that creative flair on top that makes him a silver medalist in the Olympic Games and so on. But yeah, extraordinary commitment, high levels of trust in the program. I would say that Anna put her trust in us, which was really nice, and I think a reflection on the program's development. There was periods where she was considering going and living in China, and they made a decision to not do that and stay in Britain and be part of the program. And one thing she has done is she's gone all in. She listens to the coaches. She's ultra professional. It's the routines around when she wins and loses. She's straight back into the practical training, and ultimately it is a real life commitment. So yeah, they've moved house. They chose to study online, and they are prepared to do 25 international competitions in 18 months.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. I think you pretty much answered all my questions in one there. But yeah, certainly a big commitment Anna's made. And we know that for some, it's not possible to be on that same journey. But yeah, I think, like you said, she is very much an extreme case study who has a big future certainly ahead of her. So yeah, thanks, Gav.
I think the others, just to touch on some of the points you were making before as well, there's really strong evidence to suggest that those who become very successful at the European Youth Championships are the ones who then go on to transition to a high level in the seniors. And that's for a number of reasons. One, they get good sponsors, so they can afford to go around the world because they're sponsored through their potential, through doing well at the European Youth Championships. Two, because the European Youth Championships is under 19, if you're winning medals at under 19, you're getting onto the cusp of being a senior anyway. And three, I think they take a confidence from winning at youth level into the seniors. If you've not had that winning habit, if you like, in the youth, it's really, really hard to make the transition. So I think that talks to the point around early specialization. And, if I could have it different, I probably would. I'm not always convinced that kids specializing at 10, 11, 12 years old is really, really healthy for them. But there's also a reality to what everybody else is doing in the world, and we've got to try and keep up with them and ultimately get to a point where we are competitive at the European Youth Championships. So yeah, huge levels of commitment. I can't underestimate it. I know my parents put a huge amount into my journey as well, and without parents and coaches, it's just simply not possible.
Yeah, thanks, Gav. Okay, so moving on to our next case study. So conscious of time, I want to make sure we give Tom enough time as well. Um, so Gavin, can you explain, some of the commitments that Tom has had to make from a very young age in order to be where he is now?
Yeah, Tom is a fascinating character and one I've known from 11 years old, and absolutely remarkable commitment from the whole family. So Tom Jarvis was born in Skegness and lived in Skegness throughout his childhood when he was in his school days. And the nearest place for him to practice on a high level was Grantham College, and that's a 67-mile journey on the back streets, going through the Lincolnshire Wolds, and ultimately it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours there and back, and it's quite remarkable even looking back. But Tom would travel 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. He'd be picked up from school. He'd travel an hour and a half to 2 hours to Grantham. He'd train for 2 to 4 hours depending on the session times, and then he'd travel all the way home another 2 hours and go to school the next day. And he was a star student across his GCSEs, as well as being multiple national champion, highly ranked in Europe, and now gone on to finish in the last 16 of the World Senior Championships, having beaten the number 9 in the world. And again, it just talks to that incredible journey and commitment and belief and desire to want to chase your goals, irrespective of where you're based around the country. Now, of course, there is a limit. If you're 3 or 4 hours away from a hub that can provide that becomes very difficult, and it might then become a choice: do you move or do you not? But the commitment that Tom's family shown, and particularly his granddad in the early days, was absolutely extraordinary. On top of that, he had one-to-one lessons, actually with me, funnily enough, but he did have about 3 or 4 times a week a number one-to-one for 2 or 3 hours at a time. And it was all based around both what Tom and Anna's journey have been based around is repetition. And that can't be over-egged, really. It is a repetition sport. I've just been speaking to John Murphy today, who's out in South Korea with the national Korean women's team, and I asked him, what do they do different to us? What are they doing special? And his answer to me was, they don't really do anything different to what we're doing, but they are relentless in their approach to repetition, to get the fundamental technique, to get the movement, to get the fitness, to get the muscle memory. And he said, these are 25, 26-year-old females out there training 3 times a day. And yeah, that for me and for many people feels, alien. For lots of sports, it's almost unbelievable, but that's what it takes. And that's why we are really, really keen on having that chance to do that in Britain. But, moving back to Tom, he had a big, extensive youth career, so he did a lot of international competition. His commitment to Grantham was very, very high. And then what he did at 16 was he decided to do his A levels online. So he did marine biology, I believe, online, and he moved to Sweden for a number of years, and he moved to a club called Eslov. He then finished Eslov for after about 3 years and went to Germany to a place called Oxenhausen. And now he is basically between Düsseldorf in Germany and full-time in Sheffield, as well as managing all of his commitments around his club matches. So it was a big life decision to move at 16. I remember having conversations with his family. Does he stay in Grantham at the time, or does he go to Sweden? He's going to pursue his dream and take his studies online. And it seems to have paid off for him, and he's doing extraordinarily well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gav. I think, just to reiterate what you said, that really is a big family decision as well. It's obviously not just what the player wants, it's what's capable within the family and with everyone on board as well. I don't think we underestimate that.
I think what I would say is, because what we're not, I guess, shying away from is the level of commitment from time, from parents, belief. investment from a monetary perspective. There is a lot of investment goes into it from financial position as well. But I would say that what I think going on a journey like this does for those who embrace it is it develops them as people that suddenly become transferable skills in their life later on. So very few people will end up on the Olympic podium. Very few people will end up on the world podium, even the European podium. But going on a journey where you back yourself to the hill, you train every day, you're incredibly professional, you're incredibly disciplined, you're respectful of your environment, you learn to cook, you learn to fend for yourself, you learn to manage your time and study online, you learn to build relationships with all different cultures around the world, you live on your own from a very young age. These are all incredible life skills that I feel, even if they don't end up on a podium, they can take into their future life and build a really successful career, given the experience they have gone through in their journey in table tennis. And if I was looking at it from an investment point of view, I would be looking at it wholly as if my child can be developed holistically with the investment, then it's worth it. I think putting all the eggs in one basket around, trying to get someone onto a podium becomes slightly less appealing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And what we know from research as well is that some of the high-level athletes are some of the most employable people based on the skill set they develop from that journey, which you've just reiterated there. So, yeah, completely agree with that point. Brilliant. Thank you, Gavin. So I'm conscious of time, obviously progressing towards the end. So just wanted to make sure, obviously we thank you for joining us. Hopefully it was insightful. Obviously we've shared some realities around the journey and what it takes. But yeah, we're very much open to questions now. If anyone has any, feel free to put them in chat, or also feel free to speak up. We've got a couple of minutes. So yeah, does anyone have any final reflections or questions they'd like to ask? Just let me know if there's any in the chat, Gavin.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. No one has questions, then obviously we will share the slides, we'll share the recording with everyone who signed up to the session, and obviously we will be very much open to answering any questions you might have after reflecting on it this evening. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and thank you, Gavin, for joining me and helping me today. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And
Emma,
we'll listen soon.
I did miss something on my notes. One thing, you may have touched on it, but one thing that have been eye-opening to me going through my journey as an athlete and going with athletes as a coach is injury. So learning to manage injury. So I've had 3 operations. Tom Jarvis had an operation. Liam Pitchley was just going into an operation. Now, there's obviously a big thing that we need to do around strength conditioning and the way we look after our athletes from a physical point of view. And there is an argument to say that all the repetition we do at a young age may contribute to that. And we've had some extensive research done by some research students in Sheffield Hallam to look at that, to really look at, is it right what we're doing? How do we prevent injury? What can we do to mitigate any of the obvious injuries that we keep getting? But managing injury is really, really important, and almost expecting that at some stage in your journey, you'll have to cope with something that feels very, very difficult at the time. And trying to think about, right, how am I going to cope with that, and who do I need around me as a support team to support me in that journey?
Yeah, thanks, Gav. Yeah, obviously taking a number of months out, possibly following operations, major injuries, can be a huge setback, and maybe take even a year or 2 to get back to the position you were in. So it takes a lot of motivation and drive to do that. But yeah, certainly would, unfortunately, for some of our best players, expect to experience injury from such a high repetition sport. So yeah, thank you for flagging that. It's really a really important part as well. Brilliant. Well, if there's no comments in the chat, just double checking it, then Brilliant. Well, we'll see you all soon. So thanks for joining, and we will share the slides tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.